Who's on board? Who's on board? Who's on board? Who's on board? Who's with me? Who's with me? Yay! Awesome. Gabriel, how you doing, my brother? Olumide, bless you, sir. Mel, bless you. Bless your heart. Andrea Robinson, bless you, darling. Bless your heart. God bless you. Natalie. Sheena. Brap. We could all tell where you're from. Dacia, bless you. Who else is coming on board? Let's get it all the way up. Let's get it all the way up before we begin tonight. I've been pressured into this. I'm messing around. Bless you guys. We love the word. I'm a wordaholic. It seems like people have been blessed by these posts all over the world. And prayer obviously changes things. You guys have been praying and messing up my day with your prayers, really, I guess. That's caused me to be able to do this. If you can hear me, give me a few thumbs ups or hearts, as many as you can, so I know you can hear me clearly. I forget I'm playing this music in the background. Maybe I should turn this off now. Let's wait for a few more people to join us and then we'll begin. How's your day been going? Hope you've had a blessed day in our British winter. We are officially in winter. The temperature was so cold today. I'm doing the typical British thing and talking about the weather. Let's get a few more people in, then we'll kick off. Get a few more people in. I'll wait for you. Matty G, hey, Victoria, Vicky Brown, bless you. Esme, all the way up there in the Midlands, bless you, darling. Charmaine, God bless your heart. Hassani Pettiford is in the house. He's going to be with us. For the marriage conference. Bless you, sir. Melissa, bless you. Melissa Knight. Sharon, Tomlin Kais. How you doing? Are you in the UK or are you in the Caribbean? I don't know where you are logging on here. Who else is there? My eyesight feels better tonight. Reverend Dr. Elder Mike Clark's in the house. Bless you. Charmaine with Marie Fife. God bless you, Marie. Michelle Matuyoa. God bless you, Michelle. Who else is in the house? Who else is here? Mary. God bless you, Mary. Marcia LCD has arrived. You know we can start now, right? Bless you. Seeing as you're stirring up all these protests, I don't know if it's Black Lives Matter or Bible Lives Matter, but you know, we're here. The protest works. Who else are we seeing here? Nicola Mumford, bless you, Nick. Harrison in the house. Big HU. Bless you. Alana. Let's get up just a few more and then we'll kick off. I'm going to wait for a few more to come in and then we'll talk, have a few reflections, literal just reflections. Can we get another one in and then I'll go. Let's get one more, then I'll go. Make sure you share the post. Make sure you like what you're seeing, not just the thumbs ups and the hearts. Let's like, so we're in unity here. Who else are we here? All right, I'm waiting for one more. Give me one more person join and then we'll jump into it. I'm waiting for that magic number. The pastor's talking about magic. That's hilarious. All right, we're there. Right, good. All right, let's start. Let's talk. Lord, have mercy upon me. Proverbs 5. What kind of a proverb is that? Lord Jesus, Lord, there's so much in there. These Facebook Lives, by the way, are specifically aimed at really inspiration. They're supposed to be inspirational, not exegetical. So we're not preaching. It's not an exegesis, a dissection. We're not preaching this thing. If you want preaching, you need to come to the tab on Sunday or find a great church in your own area. If you want more teaching, you can log on to TBN UK's website. And one of my team put the website up for TBN UK, please, so somebody can get it. I can't remember the full website, but TBN UK, you can get our online teachings. This isn't so much teaching as much. I mean, I suppose there's teaching in the Facebook Lives. This is more reflection, stimulating our thoughts during this 31 days in the book of Proverbs. But for teaching, TBN UK, or watch the TBN teaching we do on 7 p.m. on Sunday evenings, and it's also repeated at other times. I'm sure one of my team will be able to throw that up for me. Help me team. Where's the gang who's going to throw some of that stuff up? Who can catch the teaching? So people can catch the teaching on TBN at 7 p.m. on Sunday nights and repeated throughout the week as well. But this is really, as I say, this is not exegetical, it's inspirational. As we reflect and look at what's come out at us, what's jumped at us as it in regards to this particular chapter in Proverb. Lord have mercy. Reading this chapter in Proverb, man, this Solomon thing. Solomon's going all the way in on this one. Let me open by, as I try to at the beginning of every Facebook Live, just giving a few more facts when it comes to the book of Proverbs in general. The book of Proverbs specifically, is of course a book filled with wisdom. It's one of the wisdom books, along with books such as Ecclesiastes, even the book of Job. So you're a Song of Solomon as well. They also have a poetic, never forget that, it has a poetic literary genre to it as well. So there's lots of poetic statements. So when you're dealing with poetry, of course, and I guess I'm not supposed to be using exegesis here, but let me at least kind of give some kind of header to the whole thing. When you're dealing with poetry, you're also dealing with metaphor, you're dealing with allegory, you're dealing with all these different things. So there's lots of symbolism and stuff like that in there, as well as literal stuff. So there's lots inside of it, and it takes kind of slowing the car down and taking in the view, if you catch my understanding, when it comes to trying to digest some of what Proverbs says. Of course, Proverbs was primarily written by Solomon. You got other guys who wrote a few of the Proverbs, like Proverbs chapter 30 and so on. But Solomon gives us a load of stuff here. And Solomon, of course, we classify him as the most knowledgeable guy, at least, in history other than Jesus. And he's the wise guy, we know, Solomon. And it's fascinating, as I was thinking about some of the facts of Solomon. If you check out 1 Kings chapter 4, 1 Kings 4 and 32, 1 Kings 4 and 32 lets us know that actually Solomon wrote over 3,000 Proverbs. Okay, 3,000 Proverbs, and it says he wrote around, I think it's around 1,005. You can check that out in your own time. I think it's 1,005 songs in his day, and of course over 3,000 Proverbs. But God, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, chose to include the portion of that 3,000 within what we call the book of Proverbs. And of course included in that is the wisdoms in Ecclesiastes, etc. Okay, so that's just some facts here about Solomon. I just love what this guy's coming out with. But hey, man, I tell you, I found this so fascinating for a plethora of reasons. This guy, at first, when I read this, I said, what kind of audacity have you got, Solomon, to talk to me about some of the stuff you're talking about in here? Side eyes to Solomon's whole heap of wives and whole heap of concubines. I couldn't understand that one until the Lord began to give me, thank you, Francesca. She's putting up the TBN website there. I appreciate you. Bless you, darling. That's my niece right there, actually. And so what we've got to understand, well, at least what at first I thought it was an audacity. And then, did anybody else think that? Was anybody else along with me thinking, now, fam, how you talking? Bro, how you talking about all this kind of stuff, and yet we're looking in your house? And in your house, there's one whole heap of concubines and wives. It just felt a little strange to me that Solomon's telling the son, my son, listen to my wisdom. And then you got all that stuff going on. But then the Lord began to speak to me, and it was profound what the Lord said to me. It might not be profound to you, but for me, I found it quite profound, the way the Lord led my mind into realizing why Solomon writes what he writes. First of all, let's talk about the fact that he talks once again about my son. He's addressed it to my son, the immature. The immature needs the mature to pour into him. The immature needs the mature to pour into him. Immaturity versus maturity. That my son listen to my wisdom thing is immaturity versus maturity. And I kind of want to connect that a little bit to what we spoke about yesterday in the previous chapter, in chapter 4, where we talked about the importance of having father figures. Now, even if you didn't have a great biological father in terms of the person who sired you, if you want to use that terminology, you can find father figures, mentors in life, in the different arenas of life, spiritual mentors. Everybody should at least have a pastor who is a Christian. If you're a Christian, you should have a pastor, somebody who you look to for spiritual coaching. But there's other areas of life where we can have fathers. But fathers are interesting here. He says, my son, listen to your father's advice. He opens up in verse 1 talking about that. And what I remembered something struck me about that sometimes trying to father people, trying to give instructions to people. And this theme is actually all the way through the book of Proverb, and especially here in chapter 5, the issue of receiving discipline and receiving correction. And we talk about that and you'll see that. But I'm talking about what really struck me in particular concerning this. And it's what happens in Hebraic culture. In Hebraic culture, listen to the metaphor and listen to the understanding. In Hebraic culture, it was always, now you'll understand they practice the practice, which I guess makes some of the men squirm when you hear it preached at your church. But they practiced, of course, circumcision, the cutting of the foreskin. But what's fascinating to me, it was always the father that had to circumcise the son. It was the father that had the responsibility of, watch this, cutting the flesh, the excess flesh on the child. And what we understand from that as a principle, out of that what we can draw, is that we need fathers, we need mentors, we need people who have the right to speak to the excess flesh in our lives. Every one of us, I'll put both my hands up, sometimes have fleshly moments, stuff where your flesh tries to override the will of God. But all of us need fathers, father figures, and that could even be, I guess it can be, of course, it can be it's non-gender specific in today's New Testament age. We are neither Jew nor Greek. We are neither male nor female in Christ. We need people, when we talk about it today in the New Testament, we're talking about people who are ahead of us, people we can look up to, who have the right to cut the excess flesh in our lives. Now, I know Christians, I keep telling you, we are Academy Award winners. We stand up there with the Academy Award, holding it up, saying, I thank God, I thank my mother, I thank my father. We're great actors and actresses, but the truth be told, everybody has some excess flesh sometimes, okay? And we need people around us who have the right to speak truth into our life and to cut that flesh. Now, of course, I know this is going out live, and I know we've got some people who are probably tuning in who may take what I'm saying literally. I'm not speaking about cutting anybody literally, okay? That's my footnote for anybody who tries to say I said anything. So there you go. So I've covered that one. But for those of you who are spiritually minded, you understand exactly what I'm saying. If that makes sense to you, give me some thumbs up, some hearts. Let me see that you're on board, you're on the same page as me, because it is really striking that this constantly comes out in the book of Proverbs about the fact that it's the father speaking to the son. First question to ask myself, and the first question again to ask yourselves, and it connects, I understand it connects with what we said yesterday. I don't want to sound repetitive, but at the risk of sounding like I'm repeating something, I just think I'm trying to emphasize it. Who has the right to cut your flesh this year? Because it's the flesh that often gets in the way of us making righteous decisions and spiritual decisions and walking in the right path. Who has the right to speak into your life? If you have nobody who has the right to speak into your life, then it's either that you are being maybe potentially a little bit complacent, or potentially you're full of pride. And I'm just going to say it frankly, because all of us struggle with different things at different times. We need somebody who has the right just to speak truth to us. Truth often hurts, but I tell you one thing, it's the truth that will set you free. It's the truth that will set us free. So he says, my son. The other thing that struck me about the my son thing, as I looked at that, was the fact that, of course, he's addressing immaturity, he's addressing spiritual immaturity. Because as I said to you, in that patriarchal culture, the wisdom book of Proverbs is trying to prepare the next generation. The patriarchal is male dominated, trying to prepare them for future leadership. But watch what he says. He's addressing the son, and he says to the son, listen, I want you to listen to my wisdom. Now that's interesting, that terminology, at least it was to me. Listen to my wisdom. In other words, son, don't look at your own wisdom. Listen to the wisdom of somebody who's gone before you. Now watch this. I found out, and as I reflected on this, it reminded me of this generation. You know, this generation, I've realized, you know, I from now, every now and again, I have to go and get my eyes tested. I'm sure some of you have probably realized the fact that I have to squint sometimes to read the small print on the Facebook Live. But the fact is, you go and get your eyes tested. And I've realized that as I was thinking about the metaphor and how that corroborates symbolically with what's happening in this generation, I've realized that the real problem in this generation is not so much eyesight. We can complain and we use terminology like some people are long-sighted, some people are making silly decisions because they're short-sighted. But I've realized the real problem is not a lack of eyesight. It's not an issue of long sight, and it's not an issue of short sight. It's an issue of insight. Nobody is reflecting on what's going on inside of themselves. Nobody is being real with themselves. We hear messages, we hear wisdoms, and we try to think of who should be hearing that rather than addressing insight. Insight is to do with what's going on inside of you. If you're still with me, thumbs up, hearts, do something. I know some of you are writing at the same time, but I want to know that that's my amens to keep going, if you catch the point. The issue is not eyesight. The issue is not long sight. The issue is not you being just short-sighted with making decisions. The real problem is we have a lack of insight. In other words, you don't know you. You're so busy trying to find yourself that you've lost yourself. You're so busy trying to chase success that you've forgotten to actually reflect on what is your lane, what is your capacity. And these are some of the things that immaturity always comes up with. It's so sad that it takes us so long. Listen, hey, it takes us so long to find out about ourselves. Why is that? You know, it's fascinating. I was thinking this through, and something a dentist said to me once really jumped out at me. A dentist said to me once, I was asking about why, you know, I'm an inquisitive guy. I'm a bit of a nosy Parker, as we say in the UK. And I ask kind of strange questions, and I do little bits of research. And there's a pain, there's a common thing that takes place in a dental surgery. The common thing that takes place in a dental surgery is the extraction or the addressing of pain. Pain, watch this now, caused by, watch this, what we call a wisdom tooth. A wisdom tooth. You all heard about the wisdom tooth. Wisdom teeth. So I said, why wisdom teeth? Because I asked childish questions. Some of you probably know. You guys who are perspicacious, have great erudition, scholarly, will know more than me. But why is a wisdom tooth called a wisdom tooth? And I found out that a wisdom tooth is called a wisdom tooth because it's the last tooth to develop. You don't get your wisdom tooth until your late teens, some people not even until their early or mid-20s. And it spoke to me to say, why is it we wait so late to chase wisdom? Let's be real, if I knew then what I know now, many of us would be millionaires. Can I get at least one amen in the form of a high five, star, like, love, do whatever you need to do. I need a few amens, because sometimes when I think about if I knew then what I know now, but the issue is this, I could have known then if I'd have chased wisdom, if I'd have allowed people to speak into my life, if I'd allowed father figures to cut my flesh. This is the issue here today. And so I want us not to waste any runway time. You know, we need to take off, we need to launch into our destinies. But I found that fascinating. You know, the old age adage that says, when it comes to young people especially, and I'm not trying to hate on my young people today. I know there's some great young people who are doing great things, launching businesses, studying, keeping themselves as disciplined as they possibly can in this crazy society. But I've realized that common sense, as you know, is not common. And we need to make sure that we chase that wisdom. And most wisdoms that we miss are common sense, to be quite frank. Okay. Anyway, that's enough of that. So he opens in verse 1 by talking about my son, and I talked about immaturity versus maturity, the cutting of the flesh, all that kind of stuff. The other thing that jumped out to me, I tell you what jumped out to me. Now, there's lots in here. First of all, let me say this. Let me just give a quick overarching statement, because I can't climb into every detail because I don't want to keep you on too long tonight. I've been pressured by your prayers and by your protests into giving you an extra day. Yesterday was supposed to be the last day, guys. So this is a little bonus, and then next week we'll do it properly, okay? But the point here is this is fascinating to me, the fact that he's speaking, of course, and what he's speaking about primarily through the whole of chapter 5. I'm not trying to do exegesis, but it's worth us just mentioning. He's speaking about the issue of, watch this now, faithfulness. Of course, the issue is the young man he addresses, and the primary issue of the young man, he says to him, listen to my wisdom. Then he starts telling the young man, and I'm going to come back to this point in a little bit more detail in a minute. He starts telling the young man, listen, young man, stick with your wife. Later on, he talks about the wife, but first of all, he talks about avoiding. And if you understand it, he talks about, in some versions, it's either the wayward woman, the adulterous woman, but what he's really dealing with in the original text is prostitution. He's dealing with prostitution. He says, stay away from prostitution. Now, the overarching thing that is really being taught is being careful. In chapter 5, is being careful of seduction. Now, some of you hear seduction and you think sex. But let me tell you something. Whatever, although in the text he's primarily talking about the woman, there's lots of things that seduce people. Success is a seducer. Now, the danger with seduction is like a spirit. I'm talking about an alcoholic spirit. Seduction can make you drunk. And when you're drunk, you don't walk in a straight line. Sometimes you go into the wrong houses. Sometimes you make the wrong choices. And you should never drive your destiny under the seduction spirit and being drunk. Never drink and drive, okay? Seduction. Some people are so seduced, and this generation where we have Instagram, we have what we're on now, Facebook, and these things are great tools if they're used positively. But in this generation where people are putting up images that make us think that everybody is just constantly successful, is making us all become seduced into trying to chase what everybody else has. And we're trying to do it with an independent spirit again, we're such an independent spirit that nowadays we don't even take, we don't even call pictures pictures anymore. We call them selfies. There's no us's, there's just selfies. Everybody's just focused on themselves, trying to chase, trying to be seduced by success. And we've got to be very careful of that. Don't get so seduced by success. Watch this now. Don't get so seduced by success that you mess up what you have. And that's what that chapter is really addressing, being seduced. When you talk about the prostitute, when he officially talks about the adulterous woman, the wayward woman, which we know is a prostitute in the opening verses, he says to the guy, he says to the young man, look, her words are like honey. He says, be careful of the way she looks. Be careful of how she's going to try and attract you. And I don't want us automatically in this sex-driven age just to think about sex in this context. It applies to whatever seduces you. Because whatever seduces you is what you need to be careful of. Everybody has their thing, okay? Your thing might not be my thing and my thing might not be your thing, but everybody has got a thing that they need to watch because it can seduce you and pull you away from the blessing of what you have in your life, okay? All right, so he talks here in verse 12 to 13. Verse 12 to 13, he talks about the regret. That's one of the things that jumped out at me. Am I helping anybody? If I'm helping anybody here, give me some high fives, some thumbs up, some love hearts, something. I want to make sure we're on track. Okay, great, fantastic. So he talks about in verse 12 to 13. Verse 12 to 13 I found quite reflective as I looked at that. He talks about the regret at the end of his life. He talks about after he's made the mistakes, he said, you will be, listen, be careful that you don't end up in the position where you become regretful of the fact that you hated instruction and correction. Hated instruction and correction. Again, we are in a generation, and I hope I'm not sounding bombastically critical today, just constantly banging on about the negatives, but we've got to be careful of some of this stuff. He says he's regretful at the end of his life about rejecting and hating discipline and correction. You know, we're in a day and age where we think if somebody loves us, they should just protect us. And what we don't understand is the love of God in the Bible is described more as a corrector than just a protector. In fact, when you study the Bible says that God disciplines those he loves. And that's talking about he corrects them. And so really and truly, we need that correction. The part of wisdom is not just words of affirmation and of what you should be doing. It's also somebody who can correct you to tell you what you should not be doing, okay? It reminded me, actually, where he talks about the regret of hating instruction and correction. It reminded me greatly of Psalm chapter 1, verse 1, Psalm 1 and 1, where it talks about the blessed man. Interesting in Psalm 1 and 1, and I know we're supposed to talk about Proverbs, but let me corroborate and juxtapose the two texts. It's interesting here in Psalm 1 and 1, he talks about the blessed man. Now, what I find fascinating about the blessed man in Psalm 1 and 1, the blessed man in Psalm 1 and 1 has more instruction about what he should not do than what he should do. See, we're in a day and age where we'll give you the 5 steps to blessings, the 7 steps to your great blessing, the 5 steps, the 9 steps, the 7 steps, the 3 steps, or whatever your preacher tells you. But the first thing Psalm tells us is what he should not do. And one of the key things the blessed man in Psalm 1 and 1 is instructed not to do is not to sit in the seat. It's a poetic, figurative statement, but not to sit in the seat of mockers, or in some of your versions, it will say the scornful. What that means is somebody who hates correction, somebody who hates discipline, hates instruction. They just reject it, full of pride. Nobody can speak to them. They think they know it all. Those kind of people are obviously not the blessed man. And so I found it fascinating. It reminded me, verse 12 and 13 reminded me of Psalm 1 and 1. Maybe it's just me, but I just found that interesting. The other thing that jumped out to me, and remember, I still want to hear from you guys. Thank you to those of you who have been obedient and been a blessing to this feed as well, by giving us your take on what stood out to you in the verses, in the different proverbs, and how they blessed you and what ministered to you. And those of you who have been commenting about how whatever I've said, the little things that I've said that have blessed you. I appreciate that. And I want you to do the same thing after this live feed as well. Verse 21, man, this was an intense one, this one. Verse 21 talked about God watches, watch this now, God's watching what we're doing. And in particular, if the whole chapter is really addressing the issue of faithfulness and not being seduced, okay, watch that, not being seduced and being faithful, okay, to your cause, to your call, to your family. Of course, the primary focus in that chapter is, of course, in a marital relationship. But I want you to understand here that faithfulness is what God's watching for. Why is that interesting to me? It was interesting to me because it made me realize that God is not just watching my heart, he's watching my actions. We've got this saying in church, and Christians say it all the time, oh, the Lord knows my heart. Oh, the God don't look at the outward appearance, he looks at the heart. And yes, all of that's true, but as equally is true, if you study the book of Revelation, anybody in my feed, read the book of Revelation. When God writes to the 7 churches, he never says to them, I know your heart. He says, I know your works. In other words, what really reveals my heart is what I do. And so what we have here, God's watching for our faithfulness. Now, if I'm faithful over a few things, that's when he makes me ruler over many things. That's when I start seeing blessing release. It's when I'm faithful in the little things. And I'm going to talk about it in the next part. But what I find fascinating here is how important faithfulness is to God. Hey, let me make a statement. I'm talking about faithful in your job, faithful in the looking after of your children, your parents, whatever it is your faithfulness. God is watching how we're faithful in certain things before he can release great things to us. Now, I know that's a common statement, but I want you to understand how important faithfulness is to God. I think faithfulness, my opinion, you can argue me if you want, but I'll just probably delete you. But faithfulness is so important to God that I think the antithesis, the opposite to faithfulness, which is obviously unfaithfulness, disloyalty, and especially in its extreme, which is rebellion, is so important to God. Faithfulness is so important to God because I think the opposite reminds him of Lucifer. Remember, Lucifer got kicked out of heaven. We believe traditionally, of course, from the scriptures, he got kicked out of heaven because he, as the chief worship angel in heaven, decided he didn't any longer want to worship. He wanted to be the worshipped and rebelled against God. God ejected him out of heaven. Now watch this. Some people need to understand something here. When you're allowing anybody into your life, don't just look at their gifting, what they're good at, how they look. Don't just look at that. If you're running a business, don't just employ people based on their gifting. If you're a leader of a team, don't just use people because they are good at something. Look also, especially for those who are faithful. Now, let me say this here. Watch God. Watch God. Let's watch heaven. Let's look at what God does. God chooses. Now remember, Lucifer was the most gifted worshipper in heaven. God chose gifting. No, God chose faithfulness. He chose faithfulness over gifting. I heard a wise man say, he said, listen, watch this. If gifting is more important than faithfulness, then maybe Lucifer could have stayed in heaven. If gifting is more important than faithfulness, then maybe Lucifer, maybe he could have stayed in heaven. But God's like, no. It doesn't matter how gifted you are. You don't have access to me until you show yourself faithful. And I need to see faithfulness in certain arenas of your life. That's one of the reasons when you're dating, and I don't want to switch into that. I know we've got Hassani online and he can critique me, but that's one of the reasons you need to look at how people are faithful in other areas of their life, which will tell you whether or not they have the capacity to be faithful to you. It will be an indicator. It's not airtight, but it's one of the indicators that tells you whether somebody deserves to have access into your arena. Okay. Okay. So that's verse 21. That's enough of that one. What else jumped out at me? Well, let me say this first of all. Let me say this before I go to verse 23. Let me come back to this issue of Solomon, because how long have I been on? How long have I got left? If you want me to keep going, give me some hearts and some thumbs ups. Otherwise, I'll shut it down. But I had a conference call planned. One of the reasons I'm online is because I had a conference call, but it got cancelled. So it allowed me some time. And I figured, okay, well, let's submit to the pressure of the people. But if you want me to keep going, I need to see a whole load of thumbs ups, hearts, also like the video. Okay, great. Watch this now. What struck me is, how can Solomon have the audacity to tell people about being faithful when you've got hundreds of wives and hundreds of concubines? Solomon, fam, let's slow down. Let's talk about this one. There's an issue, and the issue is your life seems louder than your voice. In other words, what I'm seeing going on in your life is a whole lot louder than what you're saying. And for me, when I first read chapter 5, I was like, hold on a minute. Solomon, what are you talking about? Slow down. What? Have you heard of the beam in one eye and dust and in the other eye? What's going on here, Solomon? And then the Lord began to speak to me, and he said, don't look at Solomon's present. Solomon is not speaking from his present. He's trying to stop a generational negative choice happening again in the life of the next generation. And I said, what do you mean, God? He said, don't look at Solomon's presence, look at the present, look at Solomon's past. And then it hit me. Solomon grew up in a home of unfaithfulness. He saw firsthand the effects of his issue-filled home. It was his own mother and father. His mother is Bathsheba. You'll remember Bathsheba, right? You know B. You remember B? Bathsheba. Bathsheba and David. David one day walks out. Those of you who are in the slow class and don't know the story, David one day, he's the king of Israel. David walks out on his balcony at a season when he should have been with the military. He should have been out, but he's chilling. He's like, they can get on with it. He's home. And that's why we all need to be careful when we're bored, because we can easily judge David, but every one of us is susceptible to some kind of drama when we're bored. It might not be a sexual thing, but it might be something else. But watch what David does. He's the king. He walks out, gets out of his bed, stretches, decides to walk out onto the balcony, take a deep breath of fresh air, looks out, and he sees in the distance a woman bathing in her courtyard. He sees her hips, lips, and fingertips. He sees her feminine pulchritude. He sees the mountains and the valleys of her body, and he becomes aroused. And he arranges for her to come link up with him, okay? And so they eventually get connected, and long story made short, those of you who don't know the story, and I'm sure most of you Christians do, but long story made short, they have what seems like a one-night stand. David sends her in a cab home, you know, because David's just rolling a little raw like that day. It's a bit crazy. She sends him a text message a month later. Dave, listen, I'm pregnant. And it all goes pear-shaped from there. She has a baby. The baby eventually dies, unfortunately. And then he gets married to her after a whole load of other drama. This is the remix version, guys. One day, maybe I'll do a Facebook Live just on that whole story. And what happens here is that he ends up marrying her eventually after he has her husband assassinated, arranges for her husband to be killed. all kinds of wickedness. Watch how weakness, David's weakness, so quickly turned into wickedness, okay? And if you study what God judged David primarily for, it was the wickedness. It was really when Nathan the prophet comes to David and he says to David, look, there was a man who had a little lamb, and he gives him this whole story. And the story basically says to David, listen, you've messed up and you've messed with another man's wife and had the man killed. When God judges David, God specifically says to David through Nathan, if you look at the text, he says, listen, because of what you've done to Uriah, primarily he's focused on, it's the wickedness in David's heart. Eventually anyway, David marries Bathsheba and they have another child, and that child is your boy Solomon. Solomon grows up in a home where there is crazy stuff happening. You got Absalom, you got Tamar, you got all kinds of drama, you've got just crazy sad stuff happening. And it all, when you tie it in, David had a whole load of these different women around him. He's got all what Solomon's trying to say to this son in Proverbs chapter 5, he's saying to him, look, I've seen the effects of not being faithful. Now, I don't want us just to stay focused just on the sexual thing, because as I said to you, this applies to a whole plethora of things. But he's saying to him, look, I'm talking out of what I had to grow up in. And I actually believe that much of Solomon's issues, especially when it came to the lots of wives and concubines, was because he grew up in a home where there was all that going on. And so he's trying to stop that. Some of you would call it a curse. I call it a choice of living that way happening in the next generation. And so God, I believe, spoke to me and said to me, don't look at Solomon's present, look at what he grew up in. And that's why he has the right to speak about what he's going through. That's why some of you need to look at what some of the previous generations have been through and allow them to speak to you and tell you about the negative effects it had on their life. And we can glean wisdom from that. If any of what I'm saying is making sense, I need to see at least 50 hearts. Let me see at least 50 hearts. Just hit that heart button. Let me see it so I know you're on point. You're on page, you're online, you're with me. Let me see those hearts. Let me see those hearts. Let me see those hearts. All right. All right. Awesome. 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 So, yeah, that's why I believe Solomon had the right to really speak. The other thing that hit me was verse 23. I've banged on for a long while now, so I'm going to slow it down. Verse 23, he talks about the dangers as he finishes off this particular proverb chapter 5. It talks about the dangers of living without discipline, how he has a regret for not having had discipline. Discipline is tough, but discipline is the greatest requirement really for wisdom, because you will not exercise wisdom without discipline. You know when you're getting or becoming more disciplined is when you're not just growing old, but you're growing up. You're not just growing old, but you're growing up. I've realized there's a whole load of people in church who are growing old, but they're not growing up. That's why you can be in church for 20, 30 years and still live crazy, have negative, nasty attitudes, not make wise decisions, having financial problems constantly, having relational problems constantly right in the church there. What does David say? David says that, Solomon says at the end of the Proverbs chapter 5, Solomon says, he talks about the fact that he ended up in drama. Watch what he says, right in the assembly of the people of God, right in the community of the people of God. It's a sad thing when we're surrounded by people who could give us wisdom and yet we don't learn anything, right in the community of the people of God. But watch this. It's interesting because discipline is learnt often in the mundane. It's learnt in the mundane. What do you mean the mundane, Pastor? The dreary stuff. Let me bring up David again. Let me go back to pre-King David when he was a shepherd boy. Many of you remember David and Goliath, the story. And one of the things that's always struck me about that story is how we underestimate the power of the mundane. I'm talking about what you're doing day in, day out, getting up, going to work, being on time at work, the mundane, the stuff that you think doesn't matter, the stuff that you think is boring. You are actually learning discipline. You're learning discipline. And what struck me with the story with David is the fact that David, when David goes down to the valley of Elah, and then he goes to Saul eventually and says, look, I'll fight Goliath. And Saul looks at him as like, how are you going to fight Goliath? Where you come from? You're just a little kid. You're a little kid. What are you going to do? And in other words, he's saying you're not qualified. What qualifies you to fight Goliath? And it's David's response I find fascinating. The first thing David says is, I've been looking after my father's sheep. He refers to what he's been doing since he was a kid right the way to the age of 17, day in, day out, just in the back of the fields. Nobody sees him. Sheep dung in his fingernails, the hills as his platform, the sheep as his congregation, the wind as his amplifier, and the harp as his company. And he's just been in the mud. Nobody's noticing day in, day out. He wakes up 4 a.m., goes out, gets the sheep. Nobody sees him do it. Shepherds the sheep, make sure they're fed, doing the mundane day in, day out, and nobody, maybe he thought to himself, nobody was watching, but there was an audience of one. God was watching his faithfulness and his discipline development in the mundane, and that's what qualified him. That's what qualified him to be able to go and take on Goliath. That's what his release was. And so I want to encourage you. Some of you feel like you're just in a rut and all you do is get up, go to work. If you can be faithful and disciplined in that, let me tell you something. Even though you think nobody's seeing it, God is watching. And God rewards what people don't see is what's going on behind the scenes. And some of the people who've been victorious, been blessed, the great people you're seeing on TV, the great people you're seeing doing great things, those people were being watched by God behind the scenes when nobody else was watching, and they still remain disciplined. Real discipline is when you can do something consistently with discipline in private, not just for show in public. And that's what David was doing. And so some of these things stood out to me. I was blessed by a whole load of other stuff as well, but I think I've gone on for long enough. We've shared enough today. I've given you an extra day. God bless you, and I hope you have been blessed by it. I hope it was worth waiting for what we came on to reflect about. As I said, this is not exegetical, it's inspirational. We're not trying to exegete the text. We're just saying what has each word, each verse inspired in us to think about and to process. And I've given you some of my little thoughts, and I hope some of my thoughts have been a blessing to your life. And I hope you've gleaned wisdom from them. So now that I'm not going to be online tomorrow, guys. I'm going to do a Facebook Live tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to hang out with wifey or something. So let's be a blessing and look forward to seeing those of you who are members of the Tab Church. Love you guys. I love the Tab Church. You just rock. And I look forward to seeing you by the grace of God on Sunday. And what else do I need to remind you of? Of course, the marriage conference. Hey, by the way, those of you who want to register for the marriage conference, their tickets are available now. My team told me, so you can go online and get some extra tickets. There's more tickets available. Don't mess up this time, because I got so many complaints, people saying that they missed out because they couldn't access any more tickets. But my team have worked it out and they've made more tickets available. So register before the place is running. It's limited space, okay? We're not doing it at the Tab. It's going to be at a hotel. We're going to have a great day. Going to be a full lunch, teas, coffees, paraphernalia, and everything else you need for your registration fee is going to take care of it. Invest in your marriage. I can't understand people who spend £20,000 on a day, a wedding day, but won't spend money on a marriage until it's too late. And then you have to spend at least 45, 50 quid, as we say in England, you guys would say bucks in America, on an hour session with a psychotherapist or a marriage counselor. Let's invest in our marriages now and try and be a blessing to our partners. What else do I? Israel. Those of you who are those of you who are looking forward to come with us to Israel. We're going to have a Holy Land tour. I never forget the very, very, very first time I went to Israel, how difficult it was coming back and explaining to people the awe that you sense when you're going to some of these amazing sites. We're looking forward to a great time. As I said, we've tried to, I know there's other trips to Israel people doing in March and April, but I realized talking to some people, they would have struggled to go on to raise the finance to go on those trips so early. So we've pushed it right the way down to November, so you can pay your deposit. Go onto the Tab website now and pay your deposit, so you got your place. Then you can pay down to our travel agent after that. Pay deposit on the Tab website and pay the travel agent after that as you pay down on it to really clear that fare. We are not doing this ain't going to be no EasyJet flight or anything crazy like that. We're doing scheduled flight et al. From London Heathrow all the way to Israel. We're going to have a great time and we look forward to a blessing on what the year holds for us. I'm excited about the future, guys. God is king. He's sovereign. Let's believe the best is yet to come. I love you guys. God bless you. And let's try and please don't just wait for a Facebook Live before you read the Proverbs. Stay disciplined. Discipline and read a proverb. Read the rest of the Proverbs. Tomorrow, Proverbs chapter 6. Day after that, Proverbs chapter 7. Let's keep this 31 days in Proverbs thing going. Once I've shut this live down, I want everybody to go online and write down your favorite verse, the verse from today's chapter, chapter 5, that has been a blessing to you, and give 2 or 3 or 4 lines as to why it ministered to you. Also, when I shut this page down, I want you to just like the video and share it with as many people as possible. This is free stuff, man. Just sharing my thoughts. If it's been a blessing to you, maybe it will be a blessing to somebody else. I know many of you have been sharing already. Let's all share the love, share the wisdom, and share the opportunity to reflect. I love you guys. God bless you. Heaven smile on you. Have a great evening and an amazing Sunday. Wherever you go to church, make sure you get to a church on Sunday, worship with the people. You will never find a perfect church. It amazes me how people make excuses because they say the church is full of hypocrites. Well, so is the pub and so is your workplace, but you still go there. So let's go to church on Sunday. Church is supposed to be a gym. And when you go to the gym, you're weird if you're surprised to see people who are overweight. Nobody I've met yet has gone to the gym and says, I'm leaving this gym because there's too much flesh on these people. Okay, that's what the church is. You go there, you get disciplined. It's a gym where you go to get a spiritual workout. It's the hospital. I know the other metaphors we use for church. So get to church on Sunday. If you're in any country, any state, I could probably recommend in America. There's lots of my friends have amazing churches out there. In the Caribbean, I've got lots of places, friends that I've preached in America, in the Caribbean, in Africa, where you can get to an awesome church, get a solid word that will be relevant, that will be biblical, and that will push you forward. Anyway, I've gone on for long enough. I'm coming off now. Love you, and heaven smile on you.